Good evening again. Welcome everybody to this special Zoom meeting for the UK and Italy. And good morning in Canada, Dr. Gutman. We have the pleasure to have today Dr. Jimmy Gutman. Dr. Jimmy Gutman is our Chief Scientific Officer, President of our Scientific Advisory Board, and he's the author of several best-selling books on glutathione, and probably the world most important scientist expert in glutathione and the role of glutathione in human health. It's really a fantastic opportunity having you with us, Dr. Gutman. We are really pleased and we are really grateful for having you with all this fantastic team in Europe. And please, thank you very much for joining us. And go ahead. Welcome, Dr. Gutman.
Thank you, Aurelio. It's a real pleasure being here. I have to say it would have been better if I can get on a plane and go visit the people in Italy maybe one day. I've been to the UK several times. I miss it. I love it. But this is the next best thing.
Yeah, of course. I know. We have this time we have people not only in the UK but also in Italy. You know that we opened the Italian market a couple of months ago, and we are really excited. Just a moment, Dr. Gutman, I forgot to mention for all people joining us that they can, if they join, they can find usually at the bottom of the Zoom screen a tab mentioning interpretation. So you can choose English or Italian language, depending on where are you based and your language of preference. Sorry, Dr. Gutman.
No, that's good. And for the same reason, I will be speaking a little bit slower than usual because I feel bad for the translator having to deal with words that most people haven't even heard of in English, never mind Italian. So if you don't mind, Aurelio, I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, please. Thank you, Dr. Gutman.
Should be up in a second. There. How's that?
Perfect.
Good. So so there's a very handsome man that you see there, but next to it is something much more important, and that is probably 25 years of work where I've been studying and writing about glutathione. So there's a lot of information that you can access, especially if you're a doctor or a scientist or a health professional or a researcher. You will find the details in this book. We certainly can't cover that kind of detail in a web presentation, but welcome to visit my Facebook page, where I constantly post new news on glutathione research, and also my YouTube channel, where I do my best to present this in kind of shorter formats, so you can look into a whole number of different roles that glutathione has, and for the doctor's potential clinical applications. So today, I'd like to go over some of the history involved with the development of this product from Immunotech called Immunical, where we are today, and even more exciting, where we're going to be in the future. Now, I know for a scientist or a researcher or for a doctor, the most important thing to establish the credibility of a product is whether there are publications and clinical studies done on that substance. Now here I'm going to show you the number of publications that we have that talk about Immunical. And these are found in peer-reviewed journals, some of the best in the world. And this number, you see 63 total. Well, this is a lot of work for me because every month that goes by, we have more and more studies. This slide is probably 8 or 9 months old. The number is not 63. Now we have over 85 published studies and more coming on the subject of Immunical, not just glutathione, but we're talking about studies that mention Immunical. And this is very, very rare when we look at natural products or supplements or the nutraceutical industry. So we have been busy at work for over 40 years doing research and writing papers for the scientific community. So we have many, many papers in many journals. We have many patents regarding Immunical, not just patents that describe how the product is made, but something called a method of use patent. And this is unique to the pharmaceutical industry, where the patent doesn't describe the product, it describes what the product does. So this is a very powerful type of patent. This all started because of this gentleman you see in this picture, Dr. Gustavo Bunos. Now, the Italians will recognize that as an Italian name. Not everybody does. But Dr. Bunos was born in Italy and got his medical degree as a surgeon in Italy. And after the war, like so many other Europeans, he decided to immigrate to the United States. Things were a little bit calmer, and it seemed to be a place where you could find fame and fortune. So he moved to Indianapolis. And of course, he was a surgeon, but when he arrived to the United States, there is a certain chauvinism here in North America, where we don't just accept doctors from other countries. They have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to practice medicine. And he was denied a license to practice medicine in the USA. So being an extremely smart guy and trained as a surgeon, he decided to go into research. And his research was quite excellent. This was the original university that he was studying at in the United States. But after a couple of years, he received a pink slip from the government saying, Dr. Bunos, your visa is run out. You have to leave our country. And this was dreadful news to Dr. Bunos, but also not good news for the entire medical community and that university. In fact, in 1965, there were senators and governors that tried to keep Dr. Bunos in the United States. They tried to pass a bill to keep this genius in their country, but it was denied. For me, I'm sorry to say that I'm happy it was denied, because what that meant was that Dr. Bunos moved to Montreal, Canada. This is the Montreal General Hospital in Canada, where he started doing his research and started working here. And this is great because I'm a Canadian. Not only am I a Canadian, I live in Montreal. This was great for my country. So Dr. Bunos, being a surgeon, noticed something very interesting. Why was it that a similar patient the same age, the same sex, the same medical diagnosis. Why was it that some of them would be discharged in 4 or 5 days and be completely well, whereas others would end up in the intensive care unit for weeks or months? What was it that made a difference? Well, here's a wonderful poster from the 1960s, and you could see that they recognized proteins that were important for growth and repair. And even a child would come up with this potential answer. Maybe it was something that these people were eating. Maybe it was a difference in their nutrition. Back in the 1970s, Gus started looking at all different kinds of proteins and all different kinds of amino acids. And he was a surgeon, but he did not know much about the immune system. In fact, there was no specialty in medicine called immunology. But he was introduced, and you see her on the right side of your screen, to an up-and-coming star at McGill University, Dr. Patricia Kongshaven. And here we see her working on her PhD. Now, Dr. Kongshaven is, I refer to her as the great-grandmother of clinical immunology. And the reason why I do that is that Patricia Kongshaven wrote the first chapter in the first book on clinical immunology that was widely distributed to the medical community. So her and Dr. Bunos were collecting all of these amino acids and all of these proteins and doing studies on them to see which one of those can stimulate a good immune response. So they had some interesting results, but nothing earth-shattering. One day, this box arrives on Dr. Bunos's desk. And the box is from Europe, in fact. And Dr. Bunos opens it up, and it's full of this fine white powder. Now, back in the 1970s, you were always suspicious about boxes of white powder arriving in the mail, but there was a note attached to it, and it said, "Dear Dr. Bunos, this is a protein byproduct of one of our industries. What we've been doing with this, we have no use for it. We've been dumping it in the fields. We've been dumping it in the rivers. The problem is that the fields started overgrowing and the rivers started overgrowing in regards to things like algae and other plants. And the government told us, stop throwing this stuff away into the environment. So can you possibly, we know that you're looking at protein biochemistry, can you possibly find some clinical or practical use for this protein powder?" So what Dr. Bunos did and Dr. Kongshaven did is they put this protein into their experiments to look at immune function. And their findings were quite astounding. Here is one of their earlier papers. When we gave this protein isolate to mice, we found that some of them...
Uno dei primi documenti. Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, but I don't know. There is a problem with the connection. I'm sorry, Dr. Gutman, because I lost the internet and so I had to rejoin the meeting. I'm sorry. And
no problem.
Now I must look how to get to the Italian channel. And I don't know how
wait
to...
for you.
Sorry, Dr. Gutman.
No problem. Let me know when I can start again, when I can go on.
I don't know how to choose because I don't know if I can choose. Maybe Elena should give me the...
Yes, one second, Carla. I will try.
Grazie. È che se fue la luz. Sorry, the electricity went out completely.
Oh boy, no problem. I will wait.
In any case, this is the first, let's say, more technical slide, is it? It was just
Yes.
2 minutes that I lost, only 2 minutes.
Okay, so when you're ready, I'll just do a very quick review of what we've covered.
Okay, thank you. Elena, ¿me dices cuándo puedo?
Yes, 1 second, please, 1 second. I think you can try. Dr. Gutman, sorry. Yes, it's okay.
Okay, good, good.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay, so just for our Italian listeners, sorry we had a technical problem with the beginning of the lecture. So I'll catch you up very quickly. We started doing research in the 1970s, looking for a protein that could stimulate immune function. And we were lucky because somebody had sent us a box of a protein isolate that had no use at the time, that was considered garbage. It was being dumped in the river and dumped in the fields. But when we took it to the laboratory, we were interested in proteins that would stimulate an immune response, and this one did. So when we started looking at longevity studies, we discovered that when we fed this protein to mice, these mice were living anywhere between 30 and 50% longer. This absolutely demanded everybody's attention. And so we continued working on this. Of course, we had no human evidence at the time. Tried to find a research grant to do a study for 80 years. It's not going to happen. But certainly this improvement in longevity in mice was very, very impressive. So we didn't know at the time exactly why these mice were living longer. It took us a couple of years to discover why. And here you see the original team at McGill that discovered how this protein powder was working. You'll notice that all of them are smiling except for the guy in the bottom right. They had all been taking this early version of Immunical at the time, but he didn't like the taste. So they, by discovering that this protein powder, which was eventually called Immunical, worked by raising glutathione, that allowed us to get much deeper into different areas of research. So for those of you who have not heard of glutathione, this is a small molecule, what's called a tripeptide, that exists in every cell of our body. Without glutathione, well, life would not be possible. Not for humans, not for animals, not for plants, and not for most living organisms on this planet. That's how critical glutathione is. What you need to remember, if you remember any slide, remember this slide. We're going to be talking about glutathione. And the first thing that you need to know is that you can't raise your glutathione levels by eating glutathione. Glutathione is produced inside of your cells. So the only way to raise glutathione levels in your body is to give your cells the precursors or building blocks so that your body can make glutathione. Now, if you go online, you're going to see a lot of people selling glutathione in different forms, glutathione pills and liposomal glutathione and all that. You need to do your research, and you'll find that these have not really been shown to raise glutathione more than perhaps a handful of papers. The vast majority, thousands of papers, will tell you that glutathione is not effective orally. So if you remember that the only thing you remember, then we've done our job tonight. But let's go on. If you go to PubMed, which many of you already know, and certainly anybody who does any research knows that PubMed contains the majority of the best journals in the world, and you look up glutathione, there are over 170 medical and scientific publications that you can access. This is an enormous amount of information. Just to put it in context, if you looked up vitamin C and vitamin E, and you added the amount of articles, with those two together, they aren't even half of the articles on glutathione. So there's a ton of medical information. It just hasn't filtered down into down to the common man, but it will. I think that in a few years, people will be using the word glutathione as often as they use a word like vitamin C or cholesterol. So what are the roles of glutathione? Remember the word idea. Glutathione, what a great idea. What does this stand for? I stands for the immune system. D stands for detoxification. E stands for energy. And E stands for antioxidant. Let's look at these in turn. When we look at I for immune system, this is literally food or fuel for the immune system. People who are low on glutathione are going to be immunocompromised. And the classic example is the example of HIV or AIDS. We noticed way back in the 80s that AIDS patients were, by definition, glutathione deficient. And not only whole body deficiency, but deficient in specific white blood cells, specific lymphocytes called a CD4 lymphocyte. So we did our own studies and showed that we can correct this, and we'll get into it a little bit more later. But you look at any immunocompromised patient, they will have low glutathione. D stands for detoxification. By no coincidence, the highest levels of glutathione to be found in the body is in the liver, which is, after all, your major organ of detoxification. And the list of substances that are detoxified by glutathione are measured in the thousands. So I tell people that next to water, there's probably no more important detoxification substance than glutathione. E stands for energy. We could talk about everything from molecular level to a tissue level to a cellular level to a whole body level. We have many Olympic athletes raising glutathione for enhancement of performance. But let me just give you one little detail that certainly the biologists will appreciate. Our cells derive their energy from a little structure inside the cell called a mitochondria. And these mitochondria use up a lot of oxygen and a lot of fuel. And using up fuel and oxygen literally leads to heat production. Our mitochondria would actually burn up were it not for the presence of glutathione to handle the breakdown products, including free radicals. And finally, the role that most people recognize for glutathione is its ability to be an antioxidant. In fact, it's considered the master antioxidant. Now, why use a term like master antioxidant? Just to make it very short, every antioxidant known to man, whether it's vitamin C or many other esoteric antioxidants, all of them depend on glutathione for their recycling and their recharging. When vitamin C picks up a free radical, it's neutralized the free radical, but it's also neutralized itself. The only way that the vitamin C can continue working is by handing off the free radical to a glutathione system, which has the ability to get it out of your body. So this is why this term master antioxidant is very appropriate for glutathione. And there's much written about this that I urge you to look up. So if you remember these four things, you've probably been exposed to 95% of the major functions of glutathione. We can get into hundreds of others, but if you remember glutathione, a great idea, then you really have a good understanding. So what you're looking at here was our first human study using Immunical. We had done a lot of benchtop studies. We had done a lot of animal studies. But as you know, just going ahead to do a human study requires an enormous amount of work beforehand. And you can't just decide to do a human study. There are boards of ethics, there are other governmental boards and university boards. So when we approached them, and this is a little bit shocking, we wanted to work on AIDS and HIV because we knew that these patients were going to be glutathione deficient. We had never done a human study before. This was in the 1980s, I remind you. So in the 1980s, if you had AIDS, this was unfortunately the kiss of death. Fortunately, these days we have good treatments for this infection, but back then there really was not much that worked well. So, for example, the Board of Ethics told us, well, look, these patients are going to die anyways, so go ahead and play with your little protein. I know that seems rather dramatic, but essentially that's what allowed us to do the study. And when we started studying it, the results were so impressive that eventually we got our studies funded by Health Canada, funded by the Canadian government through something called the Canadian HIV Trials Network. And we were able to reestablish weight put on these patients. Remember, they waste away. We were able to raise CD4 lymphocyte counts. We were able to dramatically lower viral load. And this, again, is what put us on the international map. We got collaboration with some very high-level people. The person with the glasses on, smiling over there, that's Dr. Weinberg. He was the president of the International AIDS Research Council for 3 terms. He wrote papers on Immunical. And the one in the lower left, this is Dr. Luc Montagnier. And you may recognize his name because he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for discovering the HIV virus, discovering the AIDS virus. And in that book that you see there, published by Dr. Montagnier, there's an entire chapter dedicated just to Immunical, not glutathione, to Immunical. So when he started getting involved, well, pretty much everybody in the AIDS research community knew who we were. So we didn't stop with AIDS. We looked at other infectious diseases. We looked at bacterial disease. We looked at hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. And then we moved on to other pathologies, including pulmonary pathologies, lung pathologies, cardiac or heart pathologies, gastrointestinal pathologies, and started pumping out our research. And this is why to date, we have over 85 studies. Health Canada gave us the right to make a medical claim. Now, this is not allowed in every country. Even in the United States, you cannot make a medical claim. But in Canada, there was an initiative to open up a third category. Before, we only had two categories. You were either a drug or you were a food, and natural supplements fell into the food category. They opened up a third category that goes by different terms. Some people call it nutraceutical, some people call it medicinal food, depending on the country. But they allowed us to make a claim in regards to Immunical affecting positively the immune system. This is very, very rare. Then we went from looking at the model of illness, we started looking at the model of wellness and who are the healthiest people that we could find. These were athletes. And here is a study. We did this, wow, almost 25 years ago, where we took university athletes. We put half of them on Immunical at the beginning of the summer and half of them on a placebo. And we put them through the same training routine, brought them back at the end of the summer, and the Immunical group demonstrated an increase in strength and endurance of between 10 and 15%. This is a huge improvement. Just to give you an idea, when we look at the Olympic Games, and again, we have many Olympic athletes, the difference in many Olympic competitions between the gold medal and the person who comes in 6th place is often less than 1%. So between 10 and 15% was just crazy, for lack of a better word. But we didn't want to stop just with these athletes. We went on to look at the geriatric population. So we did a study in the elderly, and a very similar study. Half of them went on Immunical, half of them went on a placebo. We put them through a very easy training program, brought them back a number of months later, and you see the difference. These geriatric patients were 10% stronger. What does 10% mean for a geriatric patient? It's the difference between being in bed and being in a wheelchair. It's a difference between being in a wheelchair and using a walker, between using a walker and using a cane, between using a cane and playing with your grandkids in the backyard. So this is enormously important in every age group. And with those studies and more, we applied again to Health Canada to be able to make another medical claim, which we approved. And they only grant these medical claims for companies that submit at least 2 human studies for approval. So now our more recent research is being focused on the brain, which of course is a lot more difficult to study. Here you see some of of our published studies. I wrote the first one on autism a number of years ago. It was just a pilot study, but it got picked up by other people, and now we have a huge publication from one of the top autism research centers in the United States. I welcome you to look at it. We've looked at neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, if you can believe that. We're doing a number of other studies. We're doing one. We're almost completed this, so I hope to have good news for you in a few months. A study on MCI, mild cognitive impairment. Listen to this. We now have the technology to measure glutathione in a living brain using a special type of MRI called a functional MRI. We can measure glutathione levels live in a human being. And so with this ability, we set up a study looking at people with mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is not quite dementia, but it's something you see in somebody my age who forgets where their keys are, who can't remember somebody's name instantly, who misplaces their glasses. So this can be considered mild cognitive impairment. So we've taken patients with mild cognitive impairment. We measured them functionally before, and we measured their brain glutathione using this functional MRI. And now we're correlating it with cognitive abilities, with attention, with memory. And the results will be out in a few months. And this is really cutting edge research and many others. I have been looking at so many brain studies and glutathione. I had to add a new section in my latest book just on the brain and glutathione. And here you see some of the issues: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, autism, multiple sclerosis, seizures, even psychiatric diseases as they relate to glutathione in the brain. Of course, there are many other sections in the book. I welcome you to take a look at that. We cover dozens of clinical applications, and you have to look this up online. It is a whole exploding field, the application of raising glutathione in different disease states. So again, if you have access to Amazon, you probably will be able to get my books. I also have free versions available if you're working on a Kindle. So take a look at that. And please, you can't take anything I say without a grain of salt, because I am, after all, promoting a commercial product. So what you need to do is your own homework. And when you start to research the incredible potential and actualized potential of glutathione in published research, you will be comfortable that you made the right decision. So thank you for your attention. Back to you, Aurelia.
Thank you, Dr. Gutman. Sorry, I was in the Italian channel. Thank you, Dr. Gutman. Thank you very much. Very interesting, your presentation, as always. And I guess that our guest might be interested in asking you some questions. And I invite all our guests to use, please, the chat if you would like to ask any questions to Dr. Gutman. I'm seeing that Matilde Boniseña has already her hand raised. So maybe, well, I'm seeing more hand raised. Please, can you use the chat to ask the questions?
And ask the toughest questions you could think of. Because a well-informed patient is the best patient, and a well-informed doctor, well, you shouldn't be anything but. I'm getting a signal here that says chat is, oh, here we go. There's a few things showing up there. What do you see, Aurelio?
Sorry, I see 2 hands raised, but I don't see any question yet.
Okay, they're appearing on my screen, so maybe I'll just address it. There is Maria Bazzola, so I have to assume she's from Italy, but who knows? She's asking about COVID-19. Now, I have to tell you that there's some risk in my country and the United States for making any claims that a natural product can affect COVID-19. In fact, it's risky to talk about some drugs and COVID-19 because there's so many people who have tried to take advantage of this situation. So the Food and Drug Administration and Health Canada are very severe on individuals or companies that promote something. So let me just change that question before. Has there been any research on glutathione and COVID-19? And the answer is there's been a ton of research on using glutathione in COVID-19. If you go to PubMed, you will find dozens and dozens of articles on COVID-19 and glutathione. And I have actually done webinars and lectures on glutathione and COVID-19. And you'll be able to find both a Spanish lecture and an English lecture on my Facebook page and listen to it yourself. I think there's a couple different lectures there. So it will be facebook.com/Dr. Jimmy Gutman. It's fascinating. And I think that in the future, the use of raising glutathione in COVID-19 and possibly even in something we call long COVID, post-viral syndrome, the use of raising glutathione will be a standard of care in the future. I'm pretty concerned. I'm pretty convinced. I'm looking for some more questions here.
Yeah, I have here another one from Matthew,
yes.
Medic. He says, speak more about functional MRI and glutathione physiology, please.
So now with the latest generation of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, with the latest generations, you can tune the spectrum to be able to pick up specific signals depending on the molecule. And so I certainly don't know all the biophysiology that allows how to tune an MRI machine, but we can pick up glutathione signals. It's a rather small molecule made up of 3 amino acids. So by doing an MRI, a functional MRI with this specific frequency, you can get a signal which shows up as different colors. The typical way that you see these colors on MRI, red would represent, for example, high levels. And then with spectrography, you can dissect out the levels of colors and come up with a relative amount of your glutathione. We're living in Star Trek age. I'm an older guy. I'm 67. I look at what's going on now, and it's just science fiction to me.
Thank you. There is another question. I think you answered during the presentation. Which product would you suggest to augment glutathione or to increase glutathione?
Yes, there are many products that claim to raise glutathione. And one of the problems is that so many people get their science and medical information from marketing sites. This is a big mistake. You need to go to the original research. And right now, certainly the medical community is on top of what works and what doesn't work. In Canada and in the United States, we have these big, thick reference books. One called a PDR in the United States, one called a CPS in Canada. I think in England, you have something called MIPS or MAPS, or I forgot the name. In the 2 North American books, if you want to find out what are recognized glutathione precursors, you'll find 2 items. You won't find glutathione, you'll find 2 precursors. One is a drug called NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which is a fantastic drug that raises glutathione. And you find a natural product called Immunical. So why do I prefer Immunical over NAC? First of all, Immunical supplies an incredibly important protein. It has a very high biological value, which means it has all of the amino acids in it, and it doesn't have side effects. And you could take it once a day, and it easily covers the entire day. NAC has what we call a very short half-life. It lasts only a few hours and then it's gone. And the other problem is that NAC has well-recognized adverse side effects. So if it only lasts a few hours, you need to take it 2, 3, 4 times a day. Well, if you take it once, you'll feel bad. You take it 4 times, you feel 4 times as bad. So that's why I endorse the Immunical product.
Thank you. Another question, Cinzia Tarabelloni is asking, can cancer patients take Immunical? And she also asks whether or not Immunical works with herpes simplex. Thank you.
There's a little bit of research on herpes simplex. There's certainly a lot of research on viruses in general. What I'll do is, it works on other herpes. It works on herpes zoster, but I never like to make a statement without validating it, and I haven't checked the research on herpes simplex in a few years. So Aurelio, maybe you can take down that person's name and send me an email, and I'll get the most recent literature. In regards to cancer, again, we never want to say legally that taking a natural product can affect cancer. That would break the law. So let's just say a few things. One, we as a company, Immunitech, have done a lot of research in cancer, and we have some excellent papers for you to look at. And Aurelio, can give you all a link to a small book that I wrote that includes not all 85 immunotech studies. I think at the time there were 76 or something. And in there you will find some really good research done on Immunocal and cancer. But I certainly can't make the statement that taking Immunocal is going to cure your cancer. That's not appropriate. But the question, I'm going to again alter it a bit so I can speak about it with clarity. What is the role of glutathione in cancer? And again, I've written about that. I've written a paper on that. There's some confusion out there. This is very important. Many papers will tell you that what glutathione potentially can do is block chemotherapy and make cancer worse. Those are most of the papers, but none of those papers are done in a living human model. They're all test tube papers. Cells in a test tube do not react the same way as cells in a living organism. There is not a single paper that I have come across, and if you have, you need to send it to me. I have not found a single paper where raising glutathione in a cancer patient, a living cancer patient, had any adverse reaction. And in fact, the papers that do exist in humans show an improvement in weight, an improvement in immune function, and a decrease in side effects of the chemotherapy. And so I had to write this paper because there's still so much controversy out there. And again, if you want to hear a discussion of the role of glutathione in cancer, go to my YouTube channel. It is complex, and you need to have an understanding. And I need to say that if there are any patients out there and not health professionals, you need to ask your health professional to make the decision whether you can take Immunocal with your chemotherapy, because we can't take that responsibility. But I would insist that the doctor involved needs to look at our research. We did a study specifically on patients, lung cancer patients, who were taking either chemotherapy or radiotherapy or both, who took Immunocal, and you need to see the results. They're very impressive.
Thank you. Another question is, how can glutathione positively influence the course of autism and other neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, one thing that neurodegenerative diseases have in common is they're all associated with a glutathione deficiency. Okay? But each one of them has their own nuances. When we look at autism, I had heard for many years, people would ask me, does Immunocal do anything for autism? And for many years, and I've been doing this for a long time, I said, no, I'm not aware of any. And then people would come to me after I gave a lecture and say, Dr. Gutman, I've got a son, I've got a daughter, I've got a friend, I've got a nephew. They had autism and they took Immunocal and they got better. So the next few times I got on stage and people would ask, can Immunocal do anything for autism? My answer is still no, we don't know that, because I cannot make a statement based on a testimonial or based on an anecdote. I have to see research evidence. In the early 2000s, there was a paper that came out from the United States, from a state called Arkansas, of all places, where the researchers measured glutathione levels in autistic kids and fully 80% of kids with typical autism were glutathione deficient, which lit up a light bulb on my head and said, well, maybe that is why people are saying that toxins, either exposure by the mother or the kid, can aggravate or make autism worse or even be the cause. Because glutathione is such an enormously important detoxifier. And one of the things that it detoxifies, for example, is mercury. And so these heavy metals are extremely neurotoxic. So I went ahead and I put together a small trial, pilot trial with autistic kids. And although it was too small to reach statistical relevance, what we first needed to do is show that it was safe, because autistic kids, very often, they don't tolerate certain foods very well. This study was picked up by a group in Florida, and we did a much larger study that showed statistical improvement. But again, this field of glutathione and autism is another field that is getting more and more attention. So I urge you to take a look at those studies as well.
Thank you. And there are two questions, two related questions. One of them is if glutathione can be taken during pregnancy. And then another question is, does it affect the fetus? If affirmative, in what way?
When I first started working with this research team, when the company was asked, can pregnant people take Immunical? The answer was no. So I went to Dr. Bunos. I said, Gus, why do we tell pregnant women they can't take Immunical? It's a protein. He said, I don't know. I went to Dr. Kongshaven. Patricia, why are we telling people who are pregnant that they can't take Immunical? She says, I don't know. And I asked a number of people, and I didn't get an answer until I spoke to the lawyers. And the lawyers said, pregnancy is such a hazardous situation. If anything goes wrong, they're going to blame the Immunical. Not that we think the Immunical does anything. We have no evidence. We just don't want to get into trouble. So I started doing my own research, and I wrote an entire chapter on glutathione pregnancy and lactation. Every single paper that I read suggested that raising glutathione was a good idea, was important in pregnancy. Every single paper. So if my wife ever got pregnant again, first of all, it wouldn't be by me. I would put her on I would make sure that she's taking her Immunical every day. And I can say that I have over 25 years of experience with this, because there are many people involved with Immunotech and Immunical who have had babies while on Immunical. They call them Immunical babies. And just without documenting any data, they all say they have less infections than their friends and all this stuff. So yes, it's a natural protein. It's completely safe.
Thank you. Another question regarding, are there any study regarding Immunical and treatment of myocarditis and pericarditis?
No, not on Immunical specifically, but you will find articles written on glutathione and these two heart-related issues.
Okay, and another question regarding, is there any improvement in autoimmune pathologies, and also regarding Hashimoto's thyroiditis?
Let me do the last one first. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is one of the few thyroid problems that can be positively affected by raising glutathione, because one of the pathological features is free radical damage in the thyroid. So yes, there's articles on glutathione and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now, this other question is a very intelligent question. The other question is from somebody who's a good thinker. If we're saying that raising glutathione improves your immune reactivity, improves your immune function, isn't it possible that someone who has an autoimmune disorder, isn't it possible to make them worse? Because you're going to make their immune system stronger, you're going to make the disease worse. This is a very, very smart question to ask. The answer is no, because you need to look at the specifics of what's going on in the autoimmune disorder. For example, let's look at rheumatoid arthritis or other classic examples. There's an overactivity, or lupus is another one. In rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, there's an overactivity of something called a B cell lymphocyte and an underactivity of something called a T cell lymphocyte. So really, the majority of autoimmune diseases can be narrowed down to an imbalance somewhere in the system. And it's an incredibly complex system. When you put Immunical into the organism, into the human in this case, you rebalance these B cells and these T cells with the result that you have less inflammation, less pain, and an overall clinical improvement. And we can look at other autoimmune diseases. We can talk about multiple sclerosis and others. I have yet to see an autoimmune phenomenon, the common one, get worse by raising glutathione. I'm sure it may happen, but again, I've written about this. It's in one of my chapters. More often than not, these people stand to benefit.
Okay. And I think we are going to have just 2-3 more questions. One of them is the side effects of NAC.
Yes, the majority of side effects of NAC or N-acetylcysteine are gastrointestinal. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cramps. It also, for some people, they don't like the taste or the smell. It can be very strong, like a rotten egg kind of flavor. But there's even been anaphylactic reactions. There's been severe reactions to NAC. The severe ones are, I have to say, are rare, but it has happened. And when you look at some of the literature, people are told that they should not be taking NAC on a long-term basis because what it can do is it releases free cysteine, which after a while can build up, and you have a situation called, and I'm so sorry for the translator, hypercystinemia, which can serve as a pro-oxidant effect. So a lot of people who take NAC for a long time finds that after a while it just stops working as good as it did from the beginning.
Very clear. There is 3 questions in one. Is there any quick analysis to measure glutathione? And also same person is asking about allergies to lactose and casein.
Good questions. Let's look at the allergies first. If we're looking at Immunical specifically, There are rare people who are allergic to Immunical. It has happened. But we need to look at the specific makeup of Immunical as compared to other dairy proteins. Ultimately, Immunical comes from dairy. The protein that most people are allergic to in milk is something called casein. We do everything we can to eliminate casein from the product. There's less than 1% of casein. So even the most casein sensitive person won't have an issue with it. We have seen allergies in the past, but they're very, very rare. So that addresses allergies and casein, but the other question addressed lactose as well. And again, very important to point this out to people. Most people that say they're allergic to milk are not allergic to milk. They have a lactose intolerance. It's not an allergy. It's a lack of an enzyme in your intestines that breaks down lactose. Again, we're not interested in lactose. The amount of lactose in the Immunical, again, is less than 1%. So even the most lactose intolerant person is going to be able to take Immunical without a problem.
Okay, and last question is, how can Immunical help with benign tremor that occur after second COVID jab?
I don't know. I don't know, because only now are we getting more research on post-COVID syndrome. So it's post-COVID or long COVID is still very mysterious to us. So I can't clearly answer that because there hasn't been anything written on that yet. I will tell you that I am currently involved in a Canadian-wide long COVID study, but it's going to take some time before I have results to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Then I think that's all, Dr. Gutman. It's been a pleasure as always. A lot of things to learn, and who could be our best teacher than Dr. Gutman? It's been really a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And from our side, just really we appreciate your kindness and being with us.
Thank you, Aurelio, and thank you so much for inviting me. I always enjoy these exchanges. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Have a nice end of the day in Canada, okay, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Take care, everybody, and a big thank you to Carla, the translator. That was not an easy job, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Carla, and thank you all our guests. It's been a pleasure having you, and I think it's been really interesting. I hope you have enjoyed this conference with Dr. Jimmy Gutman. Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.